question, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. First of all, can you all see that?
Yeah.
No.
I see. You can see it fine, right? Okay, that's fine. It's not as important, but you might just see a few pictures. But glory to Jesus Christ, glory forever. First of all, it's a great joy to be with each and every one of you here. It's my first time in Chicago, and so far it's been great. It's been great to see new faces and interact with you and learn more about you. And in the process of it, it's also been fun for me to learn more about our church and about what we learn, what we know about saints. Because there's so much that sometimes we just take for granted, right? Because we all are here. We are all we have a procession coming up, and there's food after, right? There is food after. There's so much to be excited about, right? I don't know. Is it chore? I think it's chore. If that brings your excitement down, I'm sorry. I was not part of the food. I was not the food coordinator. But let's come back to the point. But there are so many things that brings our excitement level high when we think of Tikhon, right? When we think of the feast day of the saints. Sometimes more so to the point that when we celebrate Easter or Christmas or any of the Christ-related festivals, the Mohan and Orthodox, we don't celebrate it as, in a sense, as importantly as we do with Tikhon, because we have fireworks sometimes. We have all these cool things. And if any of you have been for Tikhon in India, maybe you might have seen all the different stalls with toys and snacks and food and all these things. Because it's a big deal in Kerala, right? It has a big, Tikhon brings a big, huge feeling of excitement. But it was mainly after I started seminary, when we were praying the Shimo, there was one part I just caught my eye. It's the Kolo from Monday Shimo, from Lilio. And it goes, God has called me to the festival of Saint Gregorios. If I go, I'll fear. If not, I will be afraid. If I go, I will recall my sins. If I do not, I will be estranged. Which is, when you read that, this is so opposite to what we are feeling right now. That excitement, that happiness, that joy, in a sense, that's not what this song is teaching us, right? For some reason, the church, in her prayers, is telling us to approach Tikhon, or festival day, with fear. With some sort of fear. Now, that is very weird, considering that all of us here are excited for this. We are, in a sense, looking forward to something, right? Why is it though? And I'm not expecting this to be me to speak here and you guys stay silent. I'm going to ask questions, so forgive me for that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is that the church is wanting us to approach Tikhon with a sort of fear, a sense of fear? Chris, why do you think that is? We made eye contact. That's why I'm sorry.
I guess to give it the proper importance and things like that.
Proper importance. Okay. What else? Anyone else? My kids. We talked about this, kids. What do you guys think? Sophia? Gary? Why do you think the church is telling us to approach Tikhon with a sense of fear? Maybe it helps us to love God more, right? So there, in a sense, you guys. Oh, Jason, what is it?
Because you know how we should fear God.
Mm-hmm.
So since this is a festival of God, we should also fear it.
Since it's a festival of God, we also should fear it. You're very close. That is so good. What Jason said is very true. Since we fear God, because it's a festival of, he said God, I'm going to substitute that with someone who is like God, we should fear it. Because if you think about it, what's next? Who is a saint? If you think about it, at the core of it, a saint is someone who is, in a sense, appalled polished version of us, the polished version of the true image of God that is in us, right? Saints are those people who are just like us, born with the same level of, in a sense, fallenness, right? They're not born different, right? But through their lives, through their hard works, through their struggles, they got where they need to be. That is the state of Christ's likeness, right? Just like Christ, who is, in a sense, Christ has so many qualities, right? We'll get there. But these people, in a sense, like saints, are so much closer to Christ than we are, right? So that's where, in a sense, we should start, in a sense, thinking about why is it, so this is going in that direction, right? We are going in that direction of why should we approach Tikhon with a sense of fear? So that's where the better question be this: why should the celebration of a saint instill in us fear rather than joy? It's the celebration of a saint that is not the Tikhon, but the celebration of that particular saint, right? And like Jason mentioned, saints are those people who are like God. Because there is a quote that Saint Solomon has: the saints are like the Lord, but those who do not repent are like the devil. Well, let's not touch the latter part, but the first part, the saints are like the Lord. Now that's a big statement to make, because you're almost comparing a human person to God. That's a bold statement to make. But the reality is that is not something entirely wrong. Because if you think about it, saints, because of their life, because of their struggles, because of how they spiritually struggle, are so much closer to Christ in his likeness, right? To the point that when we go to the presence of the saint, especially like, people can say testimonials of, meeting saint-like people in the world who are still alive now, and even those who have passed, right? And they would say, man, it was like being in the presence of God. Because there was something about those saints that made them feel like they were in the presence of God. So if we see God in the present, in the human presence of saints, shouldn't that kind of make us be, shouldn't that instill that same level of fear that we have when we see God, also when we see the saints? Right? Because when we look at a saint, or when we contemplate a saint and their life and their work, they should, in a sense, instill in us that fear of, my gosh, how far away am I? Right? How far away am I? Because that, again, people make all sorts of claims to not be like Christ. Because Christ took on a human form. But we're like, he's still God. Right? That's why it was easier for him. But literally here, we have we have so many other saints, right? Who took on that fight, fought that fight, and became like Christ, or the most possible extent that we can be as Christ, right? And that is what our hearts should be desiring. But our hearts sometimes desire, but our actions just say the opposite, right? And that is precisely why in the previous hymn, when we first looked at the first hymn that we looked at, the fear that we fear is when I go to celebrate the festival, I realize how far away am I. And that's a big fear that we should be afraid of. Because when we realize how far we are from God, that should make us scared. Right? But then there is another part. If I go, I will fear, right? That's the first part we just talked about. If I go, I'll fear because I sense how far away I am, right? I realize how far away I am from God. But if I don't go, I will be afraid. Again, fear. So it's like a win-win or a lose-lose situation, right? If I do something, I'm afraid. If I do something else, I'm still afraid, right? But what is this fear? fear is the fear of estrangement, not feeling that love, right? Because we all are here because we all love Paramatrimini, right? But imagine not being able to come and experience the presence of Christ here. That should scare, that should be a scary thought. Because if we live in a world where we can't experience Christ, then what's the point? Right? Among us, it doesn't have to be just a saint. With us, if we here are not the presence of Christ, what's the point? Right? So in a sense, if we ourselves are living the life of a saint, every time a friend comes to me or I go to a friend, they shouldn't run away from us. They should, in a sense, crave more of our presence, right? Because we, or they, rather, see Christ in us. And that's our goal, right? For them to see Christ in us. Because when we see that and when we experience that love, would you run away from it?
No.
Absolutely not, right? You would run towards it, right? And at that point, once you have experienced that love, would you want to lose it? Absolutely not, right? So that's that fear, the fear of estrangement from that pure love, right? So that is the reason why we have to come for Pernos. But when we come, it should be the fear of us not being close enough to God. I want to go closer to God, right? But if you're like, it's too much work, then you should be afraid of the love that you're losing by not coming to the Pernos of a saint, right? The saints are like us. And this is something that we have been talking about right now. The saints, and I mentioned it a little bit before. The saints are those people who has, in a sense, a polished image or a more polished image of God in them. Because we all know this, right? Who are we created in the image of? God, right? In Genesis 1:27, right? So God made man, in the image of God, he made him. We all have this image of God in us. But for some reason, some very weird reason, we seem to forget it. But there's also something, we all have been taught this, that we have the image of God. But what are the qualities of the image of God? Like, yes, we all have the image of God, but none of us look alike, right? We all look different here. So clearly, the image of God is not a bodily image, right? Right? So the image is somewhere else. Where do you think that image is? Huh? Right here? Not saints? What do you think?
Christ?
Christ, yeah, he's the true image of God. If the image is not in the body, your heart, but you're close.
Soul.
Soul. Do you guys hear that? The image of God is present in our souls, right? And that's where the polishing that I talked about should happen. But this image is not just a random image that is there. This image comes with its perks. Does that make sense? And some of these perks are the ones that are listed here. The freedom of will, or free will as we call it for short, is not just a random thing that we have. Because who is the only other free-willed person, or essence, rather, in this world and out of this world? God, right? Because was God, in a sense, forced by anyone or anything to create? No, right? God created freely out of love. So there are two beings in this entire world who has free will, or three rather. God, the angels, and us. And that quality is because of the image of God that we bear, right? Reason. We can reason through things, right? When we're making a decision, we contemplate, pros, cons, and we make a decision, right? That too is a faculty of the soul. It's part of that image. The ability for pure love. Who is love? God is love. It's in the Bible, it's in the scriptures, right? That love is not just any other random love. The love that would make you or want you to lay your life down. That sort of sacrificial love, that sort of agape love, that sort of like selfless love. That love only one person has, truly, and that is God. But we have that essence in us for us to, in a sense, achieve that, and people have achieved it, right? And the last thing is immortality. Immortality is, in a sense, we experience, our soul never dies, right? We all know that. Our soul never dies. But we in this fallen world, we die. But these four things are some of the characteristics that we have. We all bear it, right? But how many times do you think we use it the way God meant for us to use it? Personal experience, not so much. I don't, right? And most of us maybe like we have that struggle of figuring out, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? And that struggle is amazing. That's good. Because you know then there is a spiritual warfare happening in your heart. Right? The freedom of will, the reason, ability for pure love. If you think about that, those three things are in a sense used well by all the saints. And that gives us, in a sense, a method, in a sense, a criteria of what we are called to do too. Right? Saints, do you think like saints are just born out of nowhere and just called saints? Absolutely not. They were born just like us, struggled just like us, right? Maybe even more, because as we go further in the spiritual warfare, the warfare gets harder, right? So they freely chose that life. They freely chose to struggle. And in that struggle, they reasoned, what is right, what is wrong? Do I do this? Do I do that? Right? That sense of faculty, especially like free will and reason combined together, is probably half of our problems. Because most of the time, through our reason, we know what is right. Right? I hope so. Right? But with the faculty of free will, what do? Choose exactly the opposite thing. Right? We know most of the time in our hearts what is the right thing to do. We know it's wrong to come to church late, not because it's some sort of checkbox I need to check off, but it's that estrangement that I talked about before. We should be afraid to lose that love. And if in our hearts, and I'm sure in our hearts we know that it's wrong, but for some reason our faculty of free will is usually prevailing over the faculty of reason. And all that comes down to that ability to love. All these saints have one thing in common. They loved Christ more than themselves. Right? None of them, in a sense, lived a life of a saint just for personal gain, right? Most of these people, there is one saint who just sold everything that he had just to go be in the desert. I wouldn't. Right? I wouldn't. It's hard. None of us would. But there are people who did that. There are people who got martyred, killed, because the love that they had was, in a sense, pushing them, rather. That love was so much greater. That love, that sacrificial love, compelled them to die for Christ. Because they knew at the end, Christ would be with them. I'm not asking you all to go and die tomorrow. That is not the point. But the self-sacrificial love can be, in a sense, experienced every day in the very small things that we do. Because sometimes giving up meat seems hard, but it is possible, right? But for that to happen, you need to, in a sense, sacrifice the self that is in you. You need to tell yourself, hey, I'm okay without meat, right? I'm okay without not having TV. I'm okay without not having this harmful, toxic relationship. I'm okay without having all these random things that take us away from the love of God, the love that we truly should have and we should desire. So, in a nutshell, these faculties are are some of the things that we should always be, in a sense, we should be mindful of, because it's constantly in the work. Like it's working 24/7. But to polish it, to in a sense nudge it in the right direction, is where the spiritual struggle is. And that's where the saints succeeded. Even with Paramela Tirumeni, he had, things. He could have easily just, once he became a bishop, done so many different random nonsense. Did he? No, otherwise we wouldn't be celebrating him like this, right? If he did not choose that sacrificial love, because he died pretty young. That is because of his hardcore fasting and his prayer life. Because his love compelled him to do so. Our love should compel us to come back to Christ too. Our love should compel us to fight that spiritual warfare. But sometimes Chick-fil-A just smells and sounds so much better. And it's hard, I get it. But that's where the spiritual struggle is. Not with Chick-fil-A, but inside us. Right?
Can we get Chick-fil-A?
Not tomorrow, but hopefully later. But you get the point. That spiritual warfare is real. And the polishing of our heart, the polishing of our soul is where the real battle is. And the polishing of these four faculties, or immortality is what, in a sense, we fully, we receive as a gift at the end. But these three main faculties that we all have, because we are created in the image of God, is what should compel us to go towards Christ. And it is at this point that I want us to look at, if you have a sheet of paper, there are some extras that are here if someone in the back does not have it. This is a small self-reflection question. You can write if you have a pen. You don't have to. You can just think about it, your preference. These are some of the small qualities that I just, picked out of Christ, right? Christ. When we think about him, there are so many qualities that we can think of and contemplate on. But these five are the five, right? Yeah, these five are the ones that, in a sense, stood out to me. His humility, the condescension that he took upon to become human, right? To become a created being. That's another sermon. We don't have to go into that. Incarnation is probably one of the mind-blowing things that ever happened in this world. And for that to happen, for our Creator to take on our being, right? That is insane. That sort of humility, my gosh. Hold up. Found with Saint Mary. It's not impossible. Humility is huge. But the one who bore Christ, who knew that it was Christ, it was the Son of God that was in me, knowing that, man, I would have used that card everywhere and anywhere possible. And I was like, hey, I am bearing the Son of Christ. Give me a Chick-fil-A. Right? I would have used it. But what is Mary doing? She's traveling to see her, I'm forgetting the relation, but to see Elizabeth, right? Cousin, right? It's not sister. But she's traveling. She who is bearing the Son of God is traveling to serve someone else. That sort of humility, my gosh, right? We should try to be there. And it has happened. Again, Mary lived that life. She wasn't, in a sense, born with some sort of humility cover-up, right? She worked on it, and her humility is what, in a sense, enabled her, or what caused Christ, or God to choose her to bear him. Does that make sense? Patience. Christ, during his passion, never even once yelled at or cursed at any of the people that were beating him or mocking him, right? And that sort of patience we also see with St. Ignatius. I don't know if you all know the story, right? Towards the end, when he knew he was going to be martyred. He could have said all sorts of things to the people, who were, taking him to the place, right? All sorts of things. But what does he do instead? He starts writing. He's writing letters to his spiritual children, to the churches that he served, right? And seeing this love, seeing this patience, what happens? The people who were taking him to kill him converted to Christianity. Again, if Ignatius was just sitting there and just talking, hey, have you heard about Christ? They would have not listened. What they experienced through St. Ignatius is the love that St. Ignatius experienced from Christ. And it's that love that converted those people who were taking him to kill him. Does that make sense? Forgiveness that Christ had. He forgave. Like, we know the story. During the Passion, those who were, killing him, he was praying for them. Right? That sort of forgiveness is hard for us to emulate. But wait, St. Stephen did it. Right? Another normal person, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was about to happen. Right? He knew what he was, he knew he was going to be killed. But St. Stephen did it. His forgiveness for others. Mercy. Christ had the compassion for those who came for healing. Right? Never once did Christ ever kick anyone out or say no to someone. Right? That sort of compassionate heart, that sort of mercy, we think we only see in Christ, but again, we are wrong. St. Moses the Ethiopian, when people came to rob the monastery that he was staying at, what does he do? He helps all the other monks escape. He stays there. I mean, this is another story. He stays there. He ties the robbers that came to, kill him. And he converts them to Christianity. Not because he bound them and forced them to, but after he bound them, he took them to the abbot. And from the love that the robbers experienced, they converted to Christianity. And towards the end of his life too, when they came to kill him, he saved all others and he laid his life down for his brothers. Mercy is not something that is just, set aside for God. We are called to be merciful too. And finally, love. That love that Christ had to not only just become incarnate, you gotta just check the box then, but to die, someone who is immortal, die, isn't that mind-boggling? Isn't that shouldn't that make our hearts just hurt? Man, that is something crazy that happened. And Christ did that for us from the state that he was at. That sort of love, we might think is only possible for, God to do, for Christ to, showcase, but why don't they make? Right? And these are not just, I'm not saying these things are, only this. They have so many other qualities too, but I'm just, cherry picking here. The love that Viola Tirmeni had for the church, for her children, is the reason why we all are here celebrating him. It's not because he just made, built so many schools and hospitals and did all these things that we, venerate him as a saint. It's rather because of the love that he had for Christ and his church that we are here venerating him. Now, this is the moment, a time for us to just take 3 minutes or 2, whatever. Just think about it. We all have all these qualities. These are not called qualities that are foreign to us. Because we, just like those saints, are human. Right? Just like Christ, we are human. Right? But sometimes, for some reason, and the reason is we don't, use the faculties that we have rightly, but for that reason, we don't, in a sense, we don't emulate those qualities. And this, in a sense, I'm not saying this is the guide to confession, but this should be the start of the guide, like a small guide for confession. This reflection, when you realize, man, Christ's humility, he has no reason to be humble. But where's my pride coming from? Right? He has no reason to be patient. He is God. He can command us to be obliterated. Right? I just pulled off wrong, but sorry. But he didn't do that. But we get so impatient with things. Or we get so angry at things. So I hope you can take maybe 2 seconds. If you can write how far away you are. Or how close you are. I don't know. Maybe you are. right? And what you can do to, in a sense, walk towards Christ. And if you don't know, that's fine. That's where confession starts. That's where the spiritual father steps in, right? I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just right there. If you don't know, it's fine.
We don't know.
If you don't know, you don't have to write it. What can you do to, in a sense, work on these qualities? Humility, patience, what can you do? Oh,
Hey, watch a movie. Watch a movie.
do you know how to teach this?
There's Blippi.
I mean, we're done.
Oh, Blippi and Misha. One
Oh, you don't have to, we're done. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Let's watch some movie.
We almost done. Are they done?
Have more what?
Are you ready? Just 1 more minute. You're done. Yeah, it's for you to see. For you to I'll read after. Okay, that's time. Are we good? I know 2 minutes was like, alright. I know 2 minutes was not much to write down everything, but I hope you guys get the gist of like how self-reflection should, in a sense, like help us come towards Christ, right? And that should, in a sense, help us understand why saints are so important and why they should be important in our lives. They should be, in a sense, markers for us, right? They should be markers of, you know, in a sense, how close you are, maybe, but sometimes, and more often than not, how far away we are from Christ. And that should, in a sense, push us, not out of some sort of force, but out of love, of losing that love that is kept for us. That sacred love that is kept for us, you know, losing that will be terrible, right? And it's for that exact reason that the church teaches us that when we come for prayer and knowledge, we come with fear. Excitement and all is great, you know, not saying it's wrong, but that fear of maybe how far away we are from that saint should make us tremble, should make us think, should make us, in a sense, push us to do something, to fight in that spiritual warfare, to go towards Christ, to become more like Christ, more like that saint, because that saint, like we read that quote, is just like our Lord. Make sense? Well, for the glory of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and always, forever and ever. Amen. Any questions? I know that was a long rant. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
This is your face.